evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Brian Liddy. It's Thursday, the 26th of September, and for a wee change, I'm joined live in the studio today by Chris Stevens. Chris, you were previously the SNP MP for Glasgow South West, and you were part of the SNP's trade unions group. Welcome and thank you for coming in today.
Thanks very much, Brian. Pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. So today is the 946th day of the war in Ukraine. A NATO spokesperson said a Reuters report that Russia had established a weapons program in China to develop and produce long-range attack drones for use in its war against Ukraine was deeply concerning, and that NATO allies are consulting on this matter. The White House National Security Council said it appeared to be an instance of a Chinese company providing lethal assistance to a US-sanctioned Russian firm. IEMZ Kupol, a subsidiary of Russian state-owned arms company Almazanti, has developed and flight tested a new drone model called Garpia 3 or G3 in China with the help of local specialists, according to Reuters reports. At an event in North Carolina, Donald Trump said Ukraine should have made concessions to the Russian President Vladimir Putin instead of going to war with its invading neighbour, describing the Ukrainian people as dead and the country demolished. Trump said the worst deal would have been better than we would have now, adding, "What deal can we make? It's demolished, the people are dead, the country is in rubble." US House Speaker Mike Johnson has demanded that Ukraine fire Oksana Markarova, the Ukrainian ambassador to Washington, as the feud between Trump and Zelensky escalated and Republicans accused the Ukrainian leader of election interference. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced $375 million in aid for Ukraine on Wednesday in a package that includes HIMARS precision rocket launchers, cluster munitions, and light tactical vehicles. President Zelensky told the United Nations that Russia was planning to attack Ukrainian nuclear power plants as he repeated his calls for unity from world leaders in order to force Russia to the negotiating table to conclude a just peace. In further comments, Zelensky said Ukraine's peace plan must be supported by world leaders and that alternative initiatives to hold talks with Putin would simply aid the Russian president. President Zelensky also criticised the UN Security Council, saying it was impossible to truly and fairly resolve matters of war and peace because too much depends on the Security Council on the veto power. Vladimir Putin has escalated his nuclear rhetoric, telling a group of senior officials that Russia would consider using nuclear weapons if it was attacked by any state with conventional weapons. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has criticised the powerful but deeply divided Security Council at a high-level meeting on Wednesday for a failure of leadership to end the war in Ukraine as well as wars in Gaza, Sudan and elsewhere. Peace demands action and peace demands leadership, Antonio Guterres told the 15-member council charged with ensuring international peace and security. Disinformation attributable to Russian and Belarusian services spiked on the internet by about 300% during the first days of severe flooding in Poland, the country's deputy premier and digitisation minister was quoted as saying on Wednesday. And on Wednesday, Russia struck the eastern Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk with guided bombs, killing at least 2 people and wounding 19, regional governors Vladimir Flashkin said. The Scottish Parliament unanimously passed a motion that Scotland stands with Ukraine today. Chris, is there anything from that rather lengthy update that you maybe would like to highlight?
I think there's a number of... I think the issue for me is Trump's continuous comments, not just on Ukraine but in other things in the world, in which all these autocrats are waiting for the outcome of the US presidential election. Now, I remember watching the presidential debate between Trump and Kamala Harris, and there were a number of jaw-dropping moments there, and I'm not just talking about cats and dogs, but the particular question around Ukraine, I think, raised concerns by a number of people as to his comments, and his comments further from North Carolina there, I think are extraordinary, in which he is clearly taking the side of the autocrat. And I think that what I think you're seeing in a number of international situations is the outcome of the US presidential election may have a lot to do with what happens going forward, and I think certainly, yeah, Ukraine's one of them. Uh, it's an unbelievable situation. Obviously, here in Glasgow, we've taken Ukrainian refugees who've come and are now part of the community, and I think that that's something that we should uh, continue to do. It's a very serious situation, but I just cannot believe that Trump seems to be Putin's best friend in this particular instance. If you were to say 20 years ago that a Republican presidential nominee would be Russia's greatest friend and ally, you would think there was something seriously wrong with me. But here we are today, and I do fear a Trump presidency if that happens on not just Ukraine but in other matters across the world, which I'm sure we'll come on to.
Yeah, and I can assure you, you're not the first person to kind of voice that kind of concern. So we'll move on to the latest from Israel and Gaza. At least 41,534 Palestinians have been killed and 96,092 wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October, according to a statement from the Gaza Health Authority. Palestinian news agency Wafa reports that at least 13 more people have been killed in Israeli strikes on the Gaza Strip, where Israel's military campaign has continued for nearly a year. It reported that 6 people were killed when a missile struck a house in Khan Yunis, and a further 7 people were killed and others were injured in the bombing of Al Fallujah school in Jabalia. At least 72 people were killed in Israeli attacks in Lebanon on Wednesday, and hundreds were wounded, according to figures by the Lebanese Health Ministry. Najib Mikati, the caretaker Prime Minister of Lebanon, has told the UN Security Council that Israel is violating his country's sovereignty by sending its warplanes and drones to our skies, by killing our civilians, including youth, women and children, destroying homes and forcing families to flee. Mikati says hospitals are overwhelmed and unable to accept any more victims. Israeli media is reporting that Israel's Interior Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has said his party Otzma Yehud will vote against a ceasefire with Hezbollah, and his party will quit Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government if a permanent ceasefire is agreed. Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz has ruled out Israel accepting a proposed 21-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, saying there will be no ceasefire in the north. Yair Lapid, Israel's opposition leader, has called for Benjamin Netanyahu's government to accept a proposal of a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, but says his country should only do so for a period of 7 days. Israel's Air Force said it is continuing to hit targets in Lebanon with the aim of damaging and destroying Hezbollah's capabilities and infrastructure. And Major General Herzai Halevi, Israel's top general, has said the country is preparing for a possible ground operation into Lebanon. At least 23 people, all of them Syrian, and most of them women or children, were killed in an Israeli strike on a 3-story building in the Lebanese town of Yunin late on Wednesday. The UN estimates there are about 750,000 Syrian refugees inside Lebanon. Palestinian news agency Wafa reports that in an Israeli raid on an Al Ain camp west of Nablus in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, 1 Palestinian has been shot and then detained by Israeli security forces. 3 others, including a woman, have also been detained. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has told UN leaders, "We will not leave. We will not leave. We will not leave. Palestine is our homeland. It is the land of our fathers, our grandfathers. It will remain ours, and if anyone were to leave, it would be occupying usurpers." Abbas says that the Palestinian people have been subjected to one of the most heinous crimes in our era for almost a year now. He said that Israel is perpetuating a crime of a full-scale war of genocide. And normally at this point we would talk about the Israeli Gaza update, but we're going to go on to the United Nations Assembly in New York. The US, Australia, Canada, and European Union, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan, Saudi Arabia, UAE, UK, and Qatar have issued a joint statement calling for a diplomatic settlement of the crisis between Israel, Lebanon, and Hezbollah and an immediate ceasefire. It called on the parties in the conflict to respect previous UN Security Council resolutions regarding Lebanon and Gaza, and you can see the statement on screen there just now. The statement reads, "The situation between Lebanon and Israel since the 8th of October 2023 is intolerable and presents an unacceptable risk of a broader general escalation. This is in nobody's interest, neither of the people of Israel nor of the people of Lebanon. It is time to conclude a diplomatic settlement that enables civilians on both sides of the border to return to their homes in safety. Diplomacy, however, cannot succeed amid an escalation of this conflict. Thus, we call for an immediate 21-day ceasefire across the Lebanon-Israel border to provide space for diplomacy towards the conclusion of a diplomatic settlement consistent with UNSCR 1701 and the implementation of UNSCR 2735 regarding a ceasefire in Gaza. We call on all parties, including the governments of Israel and Lebanon, to endorse a temporary ceasefire immediately consistent with UNSCR 1701 during this period and to give a real chance to a diplomatic settlement. We are then prepared to fully support all diplomatic efforts to conclude an agreement between Lebanon and Israel within this period, building on efforts over the last months that end this crisis altogether." It was published just after Israel had announced it had carried out a precise strike on Beirut, which Israeli media has been briefed was aimed at a senior Hezbollah commander. Israel's military has been carrying out exercises in the north of the country to prepare for the ground incursion into Lebanon. For its part, Hezbollah has continued to fire rockets into Israel and, in an earlier statement, said it had struck at defence industry targets near Haifa. Over 600 people have been killed and thousands more wounded in Lebanon since Israel launched its intense aerial bombardment on Monday. It claims to be targeting infrastructure used by Hezbollah, including striking a bridge that marked a crossing point between Syria and Lebanon. So, Chris, that's a huge amount of data that we've covered there. Did you manage to salvage anything from that you would maybe like to highlight?
I think it's heartbreaking what's been going on. This obviously started in October. SNP MPs then and still are arguing for a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza. It's now escalated. I think the key thing that came out there from yourself, which I think is utterly heartbreaking, is that you have Syrian refugees fleeing an unsafe country now being killed in another country of which they thought was, a secure and safe country to be in, and now being killed. And that 750,000 Syrian refugees being based in Lebanon at the moment is a significant figure. The fact that the international community, I think, to get the countries that have just been listed, US, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all singing from the same hymn sheet is very difficult at times, diplomatically. The fact that they're all calling for an immediate Israel and Hezbollah ceasefire, that's what should happen. But again, it comes back to my original point. It's been fairly obvious for weeks that Netanyahu is waiting for the outcome of the US presidential election because he doesn't seem to be listening to the US or the UK at the moment and other allies. So, I mean, I just view some of this, it just breaks my heart when I watch some of this in the news about what's going on in that in that particular area of the world. And I do think that the people of Gaza are being subjected to collective punishment, and I think that really needs to end, and there needs to be a ceasefire. And I do fear what's going to happen going forward. I have very little respect for Netanyahu and how he is conducting not only himself but his government, and there are dangerous elements within that government as well, which you had listed, who are saying that they would leave government if there was a ceasefire. Extraordinary situation. But I think in the name of humanity, the killing needs to stop, and we need to keep as much pressure as we can as an international community to make sure there's a ceasefire.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Netanyahu maybe tries to take his appearance at the UN Assembly and turn it to his advantage. But were you surprised to see the UK's name on that list of countries which have supported this ceasefire? Because they haven't always.
No, they haven't always, but I think that this is a developing situation, so I would certainly welcome this. The UK having a position that there should be a ceasefire. I would certainly welcome that. I think we should welcome that in the name of humanity.
It's always been
Perhaps
the SNP's position, hasn't it?
Well, indeed, but we'll see if that continues in terms of the UK, because as you've said, when it's come to Israel Gaza, the UK under both Tory and Labour have abstained in some of those votes on all of that. So I would welcome this part of it, and we should always welcome things where we agree with them. Surprised, yes. Pleasantly surprised, yes. Welcome, yes.
Okay, thank you. So the next item is the construction of 2,800 mid-market rent homes will be supported by £100 million of investment from the Scottish Government. As announced as part of the 2024 programme for government, funding will be used alongside institutional investment such as pension funds to grow to at least £500 million. This commitment forms part of the government's approach to leverage in more private investment to deliver housing, making public funds go further. It will build on the success of the Thriving Investments model, which has grown an initial £47.5 million investment from the Scottish Government to £220.5 million to deliver up to 1,200 mid-market homes across Scotland. Mid-market rent is a type of affordable housing aimed at assisting households on low to moderate incomes to access affordable rented accommodation, and helps those who have difficulty accessing social rented housing, buying their own home or renting privately. Housing Minister Paul McLennan said, "Tackling the housing emergency requires a collective effort and bold decisions. We already have a strong track record in house building in Scotland, and this commitment will ensure public funds are used more efficiently." He went on to say, since 2007, we have supported the delivery of more than 133,000 affordable homes, including more than 94,000 social rented homes. However, we know we can do more to tackle the housing emergency, and encouraging more private investment into the sector is one key aspect of that. He went on to say this new model will encourage more private investment into the mid-market sector that we know is willing and able to invest, and it will deliver affordable homes that people need. Chris, this piece referenced mid-market rent, and we were trying to work out what that meant exactly just before you arrived at the studio. But it looks like this is the Scottish Government's investing public funds into the building of houses for the private sector, even though it's to help ease the housing crisis. But if it's for the private sector, do you think that's a good thing, or have I misunderstood the situation?
Well, I think you may have, because my understanding is further from the release that I saw today, it's aimed at people on moderate and low incomes. Certainly I want to see an increase in social housing, because I think that's badly needed. There is certainly a need in Glasgow and in other places across Scotland, where we do have a housing crisis and a housing emergency, to build those social housing. And I know that housing associations in Glasgow, because the Glasgow situation is different, the housing associations are trying to find ways to ensure that we can build more housing. And that's important for everybody. I mean, when I was an MP, what I had seen was those who were asylum seekers who then became refugees were effectively being dumped by the Home Office accommodation provider onto the council. They were just dumped onto the council. There was no planning to move people on in a successful way. So you had people in a tenement flat from the Home Office accommodation provider who were then dumped onto the council and were then put in hotels temporarily, which was a ridiculous situation. So I think that my view is we need huge housing investment, and that ideally should be social housing, because there's a very real need there for it. We need more bedroom social housing, 2-bedroom and single occupancy. So we need to look at that across the board. And I do think that we need to ensure that those at the bottom, those who are struggling financially, those on low incomes, are the ones that benefit from that. And I think that's what the Scottish Government is trying to do.
Okay, thanks. You'll find that I do often end up holding the wrong end of the stick, or kind of not quite getting the gist of things. Housing was a big thing when FMQs today. I don't know if you caught that. Was that?
Yes, I did catch it. I saw that Anis Sarwar was surprisingly asking for a Scottish minister to be sacked. So there must be a whole queue. He's probably went through most of the ministerial team by now. But I thought that the exchange, and I thought the First Minister, John Swinney, was absolutely correct, is that you do need to, throwing it back at Anis, is that, the devolved administrations are having to make very difficult decisions now on the back of the Labour Party's choices since they've been in government and what they're saying about cuts coming forward across the board. Austerity is back, and I think I have very real fears for the state public services, what that means for the provisions, what I would call social contract provisions. You're seeing that with the winter fuel allowance, for example, and what's happening there. And there was a piece in the news today about that's now subject to a legal challenge. I have very real fears about what's coming down the tracks with this Labour government and the choices that they have chosen to make. They had other economic choices to make. They could have went after the corporations. They could have looked at windfall taxes across the board, and on the supermarkets, on utilities, on the insurance companies, the banks, who are all ramping up prices and doing things which are harming communities and which people are feeling the pinch. But they've chosen not to do that, and I think that that's going to be what you're going to see debated in the Scottish Parliament and in Westminster. I think. Certainly over the next year or two, are the choices or the lack of choices that the British Labour Party are making, both on the economy, on the cost of living, and what that means for public services.
Okay, thank you, Chris. It'd be good if we get time to talk more about Labour later on in the show. We'll try and do that. Quarterly energy statistics published today show that in the first half of 2024, Scotland generated the most renewable electricity in the first half of any year. Scotland's renewable electricity generation in 2024 quarter 2 was 7,312 gigawatt hours. That's a 27.9% increase from 5,716 gigawatt hours generated in the same quarter in 2023. In the first half of 2024, Scotland generated 18,084 gigawatts per hour of renewable electricity. That's up 13.7% on 2023 and above the previous high recorded in the first half of 2022. Acting Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero and Energy, Gillian Martin, said, "These are hugely encouraging figures, with long-term trends showing a significant increase in the amount of renewable electricity generated in Scotland." She went on to say renewable energy capacity has also increased by 5% since June last year, and there are currently more than 800 renewable electricity projects, with an estimated capacity of more than 50 gigawatts in the planning and in the construction pipeline. This underlines the potential of our energy transition to support high-quality green jobs. Scotland's total final energy consumption continues to fall and was 18% lower in 2022 than the baseline figure from 2005 to 2007. This combination of reduced consumption and greater renewables capacity will be essential to delivering our net zero ambitions, she said. So, Chris, has this record high for renewable energy production in Scotland got anything to do with the recent announcement from Keir Starmer that GB Energy is going to be based in Aberdeen?
Well, I don't think that anybody knows. I think it's still to be outlined exactly what GB Energy is. It claims it's an energy generator. That we found that that's not exactly the case. It's really not clear what it is in any debates we had during the general election. I don't think any Labour Party candidate could actually describe exactly what it is. So I don't think that's the reason. I still, it's hard to criticise or not GB Energy when we don't know exactly what it is, and they need to tell us, and there'll come a time when they have to outline exactly what that is. But I think we should welcome the fact that we're now relying on renewable energy. Certainly, when I was elected, what I would hear from Conservatives, certainly down the board, was that we should go to nuclear power, and there should be more nuclear power stations. And the fact that we're now seeing the fact that our electricity generation is increasing from renewable sources, I think is something that we really should welcome.
Thank you, Chris. On to another Chris. At the UK COVID inquiry this morning, Professor Sir Chris Whitty said that the UK went into the COVID crisis with very low intensive care capacity compared with other wealthy countries. Professor Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer for England, has given oral evidence to the inquiry in previous hearings dealing with pandemic preparedness and government decisions taken during the emergency. But today he is being questioned as part of Module 3, which is looking at how the NHS was affected. He told the inquiry this morning, taking ICU, that's intensive care units in particular, the UK has a very low ICU capacity compared to most of our peer nations in high-income countries. Now that's a choice, that's a political choice. It's a system configuration choice, but it is a choice. Therefore you have less reserve when a major emergency happens, even if it's short of something of the scale of COVID. Professor Whitty also explained that the lack of sufficient trained staff meant that the ICU capacity could not be scaled up quickly. He said that you can buy beds, you can buy space, you can even put in oxygen and things, but fundamentally the limit to that system is the availability of trained people. Professor Whitty said there is no way you can train someone in 6 weeks to have the experience of an experienced ICU nurse or an experienced ICU doctor. It is simply not possible. Chris, I'm guessing you were an MP in Westminster at the time when all this was unfolding, and this it seems Professor Whitty makes a good point, well made. You can buy all the ventilators that you need, but if you don't have people to operate them, it's a waste, or PPE for that matter. You can buy all the PPE in the world, but if you don't have the staff, then it's pointless. And I seem to remember the Tory government at the time giving people like Dyson millions of pounds to develop new ventilators. Meanwhile, companies actually made ventilators and had them in stock and were offering them were ignored. But can you maybe tell us what it was like at the time?
I think it was probably the most weirdest and strangest experience ever. We had just finished a general election in December. Brexit had finally happened, had been signed off. And then you were hearing these news stories of what was rapidly becoming into the UK and Scotland was this new disease, COVID. And it was quite extraordinary period of time. But I think that it was always shambolic, and I always thought at the time that the government, particularly Prime Minister Boris Johnson at the time, was ill prepared for that, because he was never a details guy. Anyway, so he was always wanting someone else to do that. But I think the point that the Professor has made today is, I think certainly for me, is an accurate one in terms of you need to make, what the inquiry has to do is ensure that it's ready for the possibility that something like this could happen again. And I think that what it does highlight is the huge debt of thanks that we need to give to every single National Health Service worker, and it's why we should reward them appropriately, and I'm glad that the Scottish Government is doing that compared to other devolved administrations or indeed the Westminster Government. And you will only get the trained staff if you train them, if not only if you train them quickly, but you pay them appropriately, because what we've seen in decades gone by is that we've had NHS trained staff who've then went abroad and made their careers and built their lives elsewhere, Australia being a good example. So the whole COVID situation was strange. I'd never heard of Zoom until this this happened, and it interfered with even basic human interaction. You couldn't shake someone's hand, or if you know them well enough, hug them, or any of that. And I think that it was probably the busiest period of time that we ever had in a constituency office. You're providing advice to business. You're making sure that they're getting paid the various schemes that people were entitled to. I was finding myself in the office in contact with the Foreign Office and constituents who were stuck abroad and trying to get them back. Just a completely, I'll never forget it. I should probably write a book about all the experiences that took place during that time.
Yeah, and time is very much against us just now, and we're going to struggle to hit the mark. But us at home, we were watching. Were you part of that giant long conga queue that snaked right outside Parliament? You all had to line up to go in to vote and keep social distancing. Whereas in Holyrood, they had electronic voting, so they could do it instantly without fear of breaking the rules. And I seem to remember one of your SNP MPs, he was a new one, was castigated because he turned up in jeans and a t-shirt or something like that.
No, that's true.
It's just totally bizarre. We're getting away from the point of Chris Whitty. That's the other thing, is people seem to have forgotten that the COVID inquiry is still going on. That's worth mentioning as well, isn't it?
Yes, but I think that the important thing about the inquiry is it's there to ensure that lessons are learned about what happens in the future, because a pandemic might happen at any point in the future. No one in the 12th of December 2019, when they were cast a ballot in the general election, thought that the country was going to be in lockdown a couple of months later as a result of a pandemic. So that's the key thing about it. In terms of Westminster voting, I think that some of our colleagues have actually done exercises about the amount of time Parliament could save if you could just press a button, as opposed to going through the lobby and how long that takes. So I think that that's something that we'll maybe come back in a future episode and discuss just how much time could be saved and how much time could be devoted to other serious issues.
I think that it seems that the lobbies are quite often places where fights break out, and maybe an argument for well-being and mental health could be used to kind of do away with them. But anyway, that's maybe another story. The Home Office has been forced to release a suppressed report on the origins of the Windrush scandal by a tribunal judge who quoted George Orwell in a judgment criticising the department's lack of transparency. For the past 3 years, Home Office staff have worked to bury a hard-hitting research paper that states that roots of the scandal lay in 30 years of racist immigration legislation designed to reduce the UK's non-white population. The 52-page analysis by a Home Office commissioned historian, who has not been named, described how the British Empire depended on racist ideology in order to function, and explained how this ideology had driven immigration laws passed in the post-war period. The Home Office rejected several Freedom of Information requests asking for the historical roots of the Windrush scandal to be released, arguing that publication might damage affected communities' trust in government and its future development of immigration policy. Officials also argued that disclosure would impair free and frank disclosure of advice to the Home Office and threaten the existence of a safe space within the department to discuss immigration policy. James Coombs, a transparency campaigner, took the case to the Information Commissioner, arguing that the Home Office was delaying responding because the information was politically embarrassing. His request was rejected last year, but he won on appeal at the General Regulatory Chamber Information Rights Jurisdiction First Tier Tribunal. The tribunal judge, Chris Hughes, rejected the Home Office's arguments, finding that it was highly improbable that the wider dissemination of the study would impair future provision of advice to the department. The report concluded that the origins of the deep-rooted racism of the Windrush scandal lie in the fact that during the period 1950 to 1981, every single piece of immigration or citizenship legislation was designed, at least in part, to reduce the number of people with black or brown skin who were permitted to live and work in the UK. The scandal saw thousands of people who were legally resident in the UK, many of whom were born in the Caribbean, wrongly classified as immigration offenders. As a result, many were sacked from their jobs, evicted from their homes, or denied health care and pensions. Some were wrongly arrested, detained and deported. The paper found that major immigration legislation in 1962, 1968 and 1971 was designed to reduce the proportion of people living in the United Kingdom who did not have white skin. Chris, I'm flabbergasted by this, and again, I think you would have been in Westminster when the Windrush scandal was unfolding, but I mean, this is almost as if it's what we might have suspected, but now we're hearing about it out loud.
Well, we did have one constituent who was caught up with this, who we represented. I think Mr. Coombs deserves great credit for making sure that this report, which I'm sure they had tried to bury under the Axminster, is now out in the flesh, and the seriousness of what's been said there. That I'm not too surprised, but the fact that it's there on a sheet of paper that there is effectively racist immigration policies and has been racist immigration policies doesn't surprise me all that much. But that shouldn't, because it doesn't surprise me, that should not highlight how shocking that actually is. That we need people to I think we need a level of immigration. We should be a welcoming nation. I think Scotland is a welcoming nation. Glasgow's a welcoming city. And there are people who have made a fantastic contribution both to Glasgow and Scotland who've come from across the world. This is a deeply shocking report, and I would hope that when Parliament returns from recess that this is debated, and let's have an immigration system that actually works and does not pander to the far right and other characters in discussing these issues, and making sure that we get the tone and the language correct when we're debating an issue as serious as this.
And am I right in thinking that a lot of the victims of the Windrush scandal, they were of a certain age, and some people have died without having had this resolved and an apology or anything like that? But I'm also intrigued that the report, the piece mentioned staff working hard for 3 years to bury the report. Would that be civil servants or ministers, or?
It would probably be an element of both, but we've seen this before in various agencies within the Westminster government machinery, in which there had been reports which they admit that there are reports, and then when we've asked to see them, whether a select committee has asked to see them or whether parliamentarians have done it in House of Commons debates have asked to see these reports, we're told that they can't have them, or that they won't release them, they'll have sensitive information, all of that. One of them, interestingly, which has still not been published, was the Department of Work and Pensions had carried out a report on whether the Department of Work and Pensions policy was having an impact on increasing food bank use. Now, obviously, we think that that's the case, but there is a report that has been produced. It's in a drawer somewhere, and that should see the light of day as well. And I think that that's just one issue I'm seeing, but I think you do see, as part of the Westminster machinery, a lot of reports which they commission and don't get published. Some of them, obviously, perhaps too embarrassing for the government of the day, and I think that you'll maybe see going forward perhaps that the new UK government might decide to release some of this, might decide to release reports of this nature across government departments, and I certainly feel it should do, because we shouldn't be afraid to debate and discuss how we can address so many of society's problems.
You mentioned food banks there. I was reminded there that we had more food banks in the UK than McDonald's branches, but then I read this morning that in Dundee, the SNP, Scottish Government's child payment policy, they think has reduced food bank use in Dundee quite a bit. But again, maybe that's a time is against us, so I better crack on.
Sure.
Chung Pui-Kuen, the former editor-in-chief of Hong Kong's Stand News, and the former acting editor-in-chief Patrick Lam have been sentenced to jail on sedition charges for the publication of news reports and other articles that prosecutors said tried to promote illegal ideologies. Pui-Kuen and Lam were found guilty of conspiring to publish seditious materials in late August after almost a year of delay. The parent company of the now defunct Stand News, Best Pencil Limited, was also convicted. The pair have been on bail since the conviction, but both spent almost a year in jail since they were arrested. Today, the district court sentenced Chung to 21 months in prison, meaning he will have to serve another 10 months. Lam was released after the judge said he had factored in his poor health and other mitigating factors, including his short time in the role overseeing the outlet. Lam's defence team had told the court earlier that a deteriorating kidney condition meant any mistakes or delay in treatment could endanger his life. That was according to the Hong Kong Free Press. The judge ordered Lam to be released immediately. Chung and Lam were first arrested on the 29th of December 2021 after police raided the outlet's newsroom. In October 2022, they pleaded not guilty. Chung chose to testify in court and spent 36 of the trial's 57 days in the witness box and defended Stand News and its commitment to press freedom. The court had found 11 articles, mostly opinion pieces, published by Stand News to be seditious. The 11 were drawn from 17 that prosecutors had said sought to promote illegal ideologies and to incite hatred against the governments in Hong Kong and China and the 2020 national security law. The judge found Chung responsible for publishing 10 of the offending pieces and Lam 1. Stand News was raided 6 months after authorities raided the shutdown and pro-democracy tabloid Apple Daily and arrested its founder, the media mogul and activist Jimmy Lai. The raid on Stand News prompted the independent outlet Citizen News to announce within days that it would cease operations, citing the increasingly risky media environment. The sedition law dates back to the British colonial era. Chris, all the time in the news we hear about journalists being targeted by snipers in Gaza and or journalists being thrown in jail in countries like Russia and China, and now we've got a British colony firmly on that list. What's your thoughts on that?
A former British colony, yes. I think that this is very serious, and I think that it's indicating what's happening in there, authoritarian, autocratic behaviour at best. And I think that I know when I was in the House of Commons and there was motions to discuss some of these issues, support journalists, highlight the issues, highlight the treatment that journalists can be subjected to, is something that I was always supporting of, highlighting these things, and I think that we should continue to do that. And I would hope that the Foreign Office, the UK government, and other governments will highlight this. And until China, Hong Kong, this is not the way that we conduct our business, and should not be the way that they conduct their business, and that we're entitled to a good free press across the range.
It seems to be a worrying trend worldwide. I mean,
yes.
Is there anything?
No, it is worldwide. I mean, I think we've seen instances of it in Colombia in the past. We've seen it in instances of that you've highlighted in Russia and in other places where journalists are being subjected to quite disgraceful and autocratic behaviour from governments for, basically doing their job. And I do think that we need to be concerned that it's a worldwide trend, and perhaps this channel can have someone from the National Union of Journalists that can maybe describe that in the future.
Yep, and I'm told that Turkey's another country that
indeed, yes,
is a good example. Well,
yep, indeed, with the Kurdish activists as well. Yeah,
a good example is not the right expression, but
another example, yes.
Consultants across Scotland have been offered a £124.9 million investment in their pay and reward package, ensuring it is competitive with other UK nations. The offer, if accepted by trade unions, will see the investment applied as a 10.5% uplift to basic pay and an investment of £5.7 million in other contractual elements. It will be backdated to the 1st of April 2024. Health Secretary Neil Gray said, following weeks of constructive engagement with BMA Scotland, I am pleased to propose a pay offer that will ensure that our consultant workforce feel valued, supported and fairly rewarded. He went on to say this will bring Scotland back into line with recent pay deals in other parts of the UK, ensuring our NHS remains competitive when recruiting and retaining consultants. I wish to thank our consultants for their dedication and patience. They are a critical part of NHS Scotland's workforce and we are committed to supporting them. He continued, BMA will now put this to their members and I hope the unions will accept our offer. So, Chris, this is maybe another example of where the Scottish Government has gone into negotiations in good faith and is hopefully going to come out without the needs for strikes, and it contrasts with the situation in England.
Well, indeed, I mean, we should allow the consultants to consider that offer, but I do, I've always found, certainly not in the last 9 years, that the Scottish Government's approach has been in stark contrast to the Westminster Government's approach when it comes to negotiations with its own workforce and with public sector workers in general. And I think that this is part of what we see as a social partnership agenda, and I think that that's the right approach to take, is that you've got to try and take people with you, particularly with the economic challenges and the cost of living pressures that many public sector workers face, and I think that's a better approach than the criticisms we often see from the previous Westminster Government attacking workers, referring to them as greedy and not other people. The funders mainly of the Conservative Party have been greedy. It's a stark contrast. But I think that this is what I like to see and what I've always tried to encourage the Scottish Government to do, is to engage with the trade unions, keep that engagement going, and to ensure that we have public sector workers who feel rewarded and who feel valued and to feel that we're being listened to, and I think that's important going forward.
Just quickly, do you think, is there any sign of the new Labour government going forward to work with unions when it comes to negotiations?
Well, they should do. Well, they should do, because some of the trade unions, not all the trade unions, because the majority of trade unions don't fund the Labour Party, but you would think they should do, given the tradition of the British Labour Party. I think it's one of these things that we'll have to wait and see what happens going forward. I think that my concern about the British Labour Party's direction of travel in government at the moment is that it's all doom and gloom, and that we've to make sacrifices, and that's a stark contrast to perhaps some of the sacrifices that they themselves making, or that some of the big multinational companies are not making either.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Improved access to housing, education and health services and tackling discrimination are at the heart of a new Gypsy Traveller Action Plan agreed between the Scottish Government and COSLA. The voices of Gypsy travellers have helped shape the plan, which acknowledges improvements in many of these areas, but recognises further progress needs to be made. The Scottish Government and COSLA will work with stakeholders to take forward measures in the plan. Key actions in the plan include supporting local authorities to provide more and better accommodation by taking steps for funding to be accessed under the Affordable Housing Supply Programme from 2026 to 27, and ensuring planners understand the needs of Gypsy traveller communities. Measures to remove barriers to education and improve educational outcomes for Gypsy traveller children and young people. Improving Gypsy traveller access to experience of healthcare. Working to remove barriers to access benefits and build understanding among employers of the inequalities faced by Gypsy travellers with practical tools to support recruitment and retention. Challenging prejudice and discrimination and helping communities to influence decision making. Equalities Minister Cocab Stewart said, improving the lives of Scotland's Gypsy traveller communities is a significant human rights commitment and is crucial in helping us deliver the fairer Scotland we want to see. She went on to say the voices of gypsy travellers across Scotland are at the centre of this second National Joint Action Plan, and it is a testimony to the collaborative work of national and local government, third sector organisations, and most of all, the determination of gypsy travellers to ensure better futures for their communities. She continued, we know current initiatives are having a positive impact on the lives of gypsy traveller communities across Scotland, like the Gypsy Traveller Accommodation Fund and the success of the Community Health Worker project in overcoming barriers to accessing health and other statutory services. Chris, is this a good news story?
Yes, because I think that this again, I think will say to the gypsy and traveller community that you're welcome, we understand the issues that you're facing, and that we want to improve your lives. It's that contrast to much of the rhetoric I've heard over the last 9 years, which is certainly discriminatory. And of course, we had a very famous interview with the outgoing Scottish Conservative leader. If he was Prime Minister for a day, he would abandon all these sites and he would get rid of them, and it's a similar language. So I think that this is good that both Scottish at a local government level, Scotland, and the Scottish Government are looking at how we can help and assist everybody in Scotland, because that's why a lot of us come into politics, is to ensure that everyone gets a fair crack of the whip and everyone has a good life to lead going forward.
Chris, just before you came in, you said that you'd been doing some work digging into the Labour Party, and I was reading today that Keir Starmer's made a mess of his first 3 months in power. He's been insisting that his toughness, well, I don't know, I'm looking for something maybe a bit more juicy. This idea about if you vote Labour, you get Tory, the acceptance of gifts is Tory, offshore tax havens, freebies, the new logo, the new Labour logo, means testing tends to be associated with Tory governments. And then at conference there, Starmer made constant references to what were usually Tory slogans, levelling up, taking back control. He even echoed Osborne and Cameron's 2012 statement, we're all in this together. We weren't all in it together back then, as far as I can remember. Do you think, does it feel like we're all in it together now?
No, it was, you're right, that was the slogan. What they meant when they said we're all in it together, what they meant is you're all in it together. And I do think what has surprised me the most, and it surprised me the first 2 weeks when I was back down in London after the election, and it surprised me since. Firstly, there was no buzz that you would expect from an incoming government, especially one with a big majority. That was not in evidence, but I have been really surprised at how quickly they have unravelled. And I think that I was saying that this is unravelling quickly, and actually someone said to me yesterday it's actually unravelled. I've been surprised at this, how quickly that this has happened, where you have, I mean, I must have been talking to the wrong people. No one ever offered me clothes. No one ever offered, things like that. I think it's just quite extraordinary that the amount of money. I mean, people are flabbergasted, going through a cost of living crisis, and they're saying that people are receiving gifts of 5-figure sums in clothes, and all of these related issues. And it just goes back to, well, the people who are funding this, what are they looking for? Now, are they looking for tax breaks? What exactly is it they're looking for? Are they looking for influence? What exactly it is? I think that's still to come out and to be revealed. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that we're seeing story after story after story. Some of them puff pieces, to be fair, but there's you're seeing all sorts of questions around Labour Together, which is a super PAC, what looks like a factional super PAC, and where that money's going. You're looking at what they raised during the election, when in Scotland there was some trade union money, but many of the Labour candidates didn't get trade union money at all. So they were getting money from significantly wealthy people south of the border who were funding the campaigns. And this all starts, I think, asking other questions. Now, I am looking into things. I've not quite, finished looking into things. Maybe you can have me back on in the future to discuss some of that. But I just feel this is drip, drip, drip already, and things are already running. In terms of, let's call them the gifts stroke freebie story, is now well on to day 5, day 6. Another story today in terms of Keir Starmer getting access to Lord Ali's flat, and what came back from the number 10 spokesperson was it only happened once, and then within 5 minutes that story unravelled. So the whole thing's unravelled. I have been surprised just how bad a start they've had, and I do think we could be looking at a one-term Labour majority government. Their victory on the 4th of July was a mile long, but it was half an inch deep. And, there are members of Parliament down there who were elected by just over 11,000 votes. These things can change quickly. And I know in politics things do change quickly. And I still think we're in a politically volatile period. But I just have been so surprised at a political party that had a slick, disciplined campaign, and now they've walked into government and it's all turned to ashes so far.
Yeah, John Sopel coined the phrase Labour or Starmer's loveless landslide, and we've been told that Anas Sarwar's success in Holyrood in 2026, he wants to be First Minister, is going to depend on how well Starmer does in Westminster. But there was a poll, an Ipsos poll in Scotland, taken between the 13th and the 18th of September about leadership, the leader's popularity. Douglas Ross came in at 13%, Anas Sarwar at 24%, Keir Starmer at 25%, John Swinney 30%. So Swinney's the most popular party leader in Scotland. I thought it was interesting that Starmer was more popular than Sarwar, even if only by 1% in his home country. But do you think people are beginning to twig about the sort of sleaze that you're talking about?
Well, whether it's sleaze or not, I think that I do think that there were a number of factors that happened in the election. There was a lot of Conservative voters went to Labour to give the SNP a kick. Some SNP voters went. There was also turnout was down massively because people didn't feel inspired to go out and vote. So there was all sorts of factors. I think that you'd mentioned John Sopel. I think that one of the best descriptions I've read on the general election is that Labour's result was a wondrous piece of political Jenga, and it's for all those reasons that they were getting votes from other bits, but turnout was down as well. So, and it was basically to do with the problems of other political parties. I still think we're in a politically volatile period. I believe the 30th of October will be a big moment, Reeve's budget. I think that will be a big moment, just the same as a budget a couple of years ago was a big moment. I think that what this will highlight is just exactly how big the financial hole is, because they can't come into an election when experts are saying there's 18 billion missing in your plans. 4 significant bodies who said it, 2 on the left, 2 on the right, who said there's 18 billion missing from your plans. Then they discover 22 billion. So I think the public are entitled to know, well, how big is the financial hole and what you're going to do to address it, and who's going to cop it, because it's unfair that poor pensioners are having to pay the price for it. Public services shouldn't have to pay the price for it, and neither should the people of Scotland pay the price either.
Yeah, we're right out of time on this, but I think if you don't mind, we'll continue. Susanna Richardson interviewed Keir Starmer today and asked him if he was going to apologise for cutting winter fuel payments while not taking money from the super rich. 4 times she asked him and he failed to say that he would apologise. So I don't know. And then I read recently that there's Professor John Curtis said that if Reform make inroads in Holyrood, then that's going to upset both nationalist and unionist parties, and people are thinking we laughed when they talked about Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister, and now some folk are talking about Farage as Prime Minister. Do you think there's traction in that? Or
well, I think because we're in a political volatile period, it's possible. But what we have to do is we have to confront Well, exactly. You look at Trump in America, and you know that's one example. Boris Johnson was another example. It's possible. We're in a politically volatile period. What we all have to do is confront reform and confront the rhetoric that they espouse, um, and how stupid and silly some of their policies are, um, and talk about the benefits that immigration has provided to um, the country. That we have that you can bring in skilled people that can train up other people. How much money that they contribute to the economy. We need to confront all of that. I'm not convinced that the direction the British Labour Party are going in is going to confront them. I think they're going to pander to them, and I think that that'll be a huge mistake.
Yeah, okay, so the same way that David Cameron pandered to the right in his party, perhaps. But that's it. I mean, we're over time now, and so thank you, Chris, for coming in live to the studio. It's been a huge difference to folk like me. So that's another bumper edition of Scotland at 7. We've gone over time. But before we go, we just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but we receive donations of around 2,500. We urgently need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. We're at crisis point and really need to increase our donations to be able to pay our bills and to survive. You know, our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or please donate whatever you can afford. But that's it this evening from myself and from Chris Stevens. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to you at home for watching. Goodbye.